Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is Daily Drop number 197. Well, the dam has begun to break apart, and the names are now trickling out. Before you know it, it will be a tsunami of information coming out. But as of now, the Sun has obtained documentation naming more than 70 men and women who had knowledge of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring and the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was trafficking minors through that ring. Now, when we read through these names, if you've been following the podcast and you've been following the case, a lot of these people are going to be familiar to you. These are people we've done episodes about. These are people we've had a closer look. These are people we've been talking about on the podcast pretty much since the beginning in August. Now that these names are coming out, though, and it's going to be available on a more widespread basis and the regular public is going to get a look, I think it's going to really put the pressure on people like Berman and the other prosecutors in this case to be kicked into action. Because once regular, normal folks get a look at what's going on in this case, people who have only scratched the surface maybe, people who have only listened to what the legacy media has had to say, the legacy media, as we all know, they've only dipped their toes into the case. They haven't had the courage to really pursue the people who are behind the curtain, the people that are pulling the strings. Because we all know that this wasn't just Jeffrey Epstein and the Core Four and Jean-Luc Brunel. They were the catalyst. But without all of the other enablers, all of the people we've talked about on the show previously, and about the people that are in this documentation, without all of their help and all of their coordination, Jeffrey Epstein has no chance of getting away with what he got away with for so long. And that's why it's important, and that's why we've made it a point here on the podcast to make sure that we name these enablers and we bring them to light. Because they all had a role to play in this, folks. Even if they weren't involved in the direct trafficking of these kids or these women. They enabled that behavior. And it is not something that we should gloss over or we should ignore or we should avoid like the legacy media does. And the sad truth is the legacy media is so scared to do more than just dip their toe in because they're scared they'll lose their access, their precious access. We heard Amy Robach say it. And we know it's true for the rest of them. We cannot rely on the legacy media to do the right thing in this case. We have to keep the pressure on. We have to make sure that we're bringing all of the information to light as much as possible, sharing it with our friends, people who might not be following the case as closely as we are. Make sure everybody is caught up. All right. And this is a good article and this is a good place to start if people have not been following the case even. Just show them the list of names of people involved here. And if that doesn't spark an interest, I don't know what will. Because when you read the names that are involved in this case and it's your first time taking a look at it, I've seen the look in people's faces when they've seen all the different threads in this case, people who have never really looked at it before, who only knew it from the surface. When they start looking at all of the other names involved, all of the enablers, all the different levels to Jeffrey Epstein's orbit, it is amazing to watch their facial features and to see them, to the reactions. Like, get the hell out of here, really? All of these people are involved in one way or the other? And now, with this documentation coming out, it's easy to just send an article to one of your friends who might not be following the case and say, hey, look, this is what I've been telling you about. So now that this is all coming to light, I think it's a fantastic point in the case, and I think it's a turning point. I truly believe that this is a turning point in the case, and I think from here on out, we're going to see the W's start to stack up for the survivors. And of course, there has been some rough roads, right? There has been some rough roads to navigate for these survivors, to say the least. And we just saw another hurdle, another pothole in the road with the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals ruling. But that doesn't mean the journey stops, right? Sometimes you have to get out and change a flat tire, but you keep on going towards your destination. And that's what these survivors have done. And they have shown incredible resilience, folks. These survivors have shown incredible resilience in the face of some of the most dastardly evil you can possibly imagine, some of the most powerful men and women you can possibly imagine. These survivors have stood up straight and taken these people head on. And now, the rest of the world is starting to get a glance at just what sort of people these animals are, and just what sort of people have been ruling over them for so long. Because when you take a look at these names, it is a who's who of so-called polite society, folks. And again, for those of you who have been listening to the podcast for quite some time and who are familiar with the catalog, all of the episodes, you're going to recognize a lot of these names because we've discussed a lot of these people. And now that it's dipping into the mainstream and it's becoming an actual story at this point, the legacy media is going to be forced to really pursue it more than they have in the past. They're going to really need to start taking this seriously, because if they don't, well, it's just going to prove once again their ineptitude and their inability to really chase down stories these days. Everything's about rumor and innuendo and scoring political points with the legacy media. It's not about breaking stories. It's not about holding the powerful accountable when they trod on, people who are less fortunate or less powerful than them. No, that's not it anymore. It's all about gotcha politics right now. And we can't trust the legacy media to search for this information. We can't trust the legacy media to be an impartial arbiter of the truth anymore. So it's up to us to force them to be that, right? It's up to us to make sure that this story has so much traction that they are forced to cover it. And that's what all of you do on a daily basis. And I'm in awe of all of the hard work that the people who are involved in this case put forward. I mean, from the listeners to this podcast, to the listeners of the Prince and the Pervert podcast, etc., people like Sean Atwood, Whitney Webb. These are people that are doing really good work on a daily basis and who are bringing the truth to the masses by bypassing the incredibly corrupt legacy media. And it's so vital that we have people like that in society who have the courage to really go wherever the story takes them. And that's where we're at now, folks, because there's no more avoiding the truth now. There's no more avoiding the people who have been named. All right. These names are a lot of them have been out there, right? A lot of them, we've talked about a lot of them here on the podcast. And even before this podcast was around, there were people talking about all of this stuff. But now that it's coming to light here in the Sun, and I'm sure the rest of the outlets in the U.S. are going to pick this up by the end of the night or tomorrow morning, people are going to be forced to take a hard look at what Nancy Pelosi's daughter referred to as, quote unquote, some of our faves. And it's going to be a hard pill to swallow for some people. But these are the facts. These are the people that were involved, and these are the people that have been named in court. All right, so with that, let's jump into the article. And like I said earlier, the article is from The Sun, and the author of the article is Chris Spargo. Headline: Who knew? Jeffrey Epstein court document names 70 people who knew sex trafficking and underage victims, according to Survivor. Virginia Roberts claimed that Prince Andrew, former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson, hairstylist to the stars Frederick Fekkai, and former Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell were among those who had knowledge of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein's sexual trafficking conduct and interaction with underage minors. Every single one of those people, folks, if you go back and check the catalog, we have talked about. We talked about Frederick Fekkai and his salon, and that wasn't too long ago. We've talked about Bill Richardson several times. We did a closer look at George Mitchell, and these are just a few of the names that we have dug into here on the podcast. So people like Frederick Fekkai have slid under the radar way too much in this case. So it's nice to see his name right here in the forefront in the first paragraph as one of the enablers, as one of the people involved. And, you know, folks, there are so many people like Fakai involved in this. So many people that thought they were going to get away with it without their names ever being brought up, without them ever having to answer any questions why, in regards to why they were hanging out with Epstein or running around with Epstein, etc., etc. But now the whole entire house of cards is starting to crumble around them. For the first time, perhaps ever in their lives, they're on the defense. They're backing up. They're not on the offense anymore. They're not running around. They're not going to be running around threatening to sue anybody anytime soon. I promise you that. Because these people understand that the dam has begun to explode and the truth cannot be stopped from pouring out. The names were included in a list of potential witnesses that Roberts filed back in 2016 at the start of her case against Maxwell, who she sued for defamation after the one-time paramour and co-conspirator of Epstein called her a liar. Every single person listed previously denied having any knowledge of Epstein's penchant for young girls, and it's not clear whether the named individuals actually provided evidence in the case. So that's interesting, right? We don't really, according to this piece, we don't know who has provided evidence in the case or not. What this piece does is it just names the people who are in the documentation. And it's crazy to think that this information is now starting to come out. It's really interesting, the timing of this information coming out right now. I truly believe that the gears are in motion and things are happening behind the scenes that we might not be aware of. And I think that the time for these people living comfortably is close to being over, folks. And, you know, I'm not very optimistic usually when it comes to that kind of stuff. You know, it's one of those wait and see approaches, and it's still that. But I just have one of these feelings inside of my gut that things are happening behind the scenes that we are not aware of. And I think that this case has started to accelerate at a pace where we can actually start seeing some arrests soon. I truly believe that. The court documents also do not indicate when Roberts believes each individual named became aware of Epstein's crimes and does not accuse the individuals listed of actively participating in any crime or cover-up. No, they're just enablers, right? According to the documentation and according to what we know, and that's as bad. Being an enabler to somebody like Jeffrey Epstein is abhorrent. Giving Jeffrey Epstein credibility on the back of your name is unacceptable. And if you were one of those people and you have information and you have something that might help the case move forward and you've held back and you haven't come forward with that information, you, sir or madam, are a piece of shit. Roberts has long alleged that she was sexually abused by both Maxwell and Epstein when she, as a minor, and Maxwell ultimately settled that. This article is pretty shabbily published here. Let's reread that again. Roberts has long alleged that she was sexually abused by both Maxwell and Epstein when she was a minor, and Maxwell ultimately settled that 2015 lawsuit out of court. So instead of was, it just has the word as in the article. A little bit of a typo. So they settled out of court in 2015, Maxwell and Virginia Roberts, and this documentation was in that case. This is where all of this information comes from. A judge in August unsealed approximately 2,000 pages of documents in the case and is preparing to release another small trove of information in the coming weeks. Now, I'm interested to see just how small, quote-unquote, this trove's going to be. I know it's not going to be a massive release, but I think we're going to get a lot of information here. I think we're going to get some interesting stuff. I think there's going to be a lot of things that we might have missed, and with all of the time on our hands, I think people are going to pour all over it the second it comes out. There has been much talk about the names that could be contained in the soon-to-be unsealed documents, but a look through the lengthy court proceedings reveals that Roberts had already identified a number of the individuals. Yep, they sure did. She sure did. And again, we've talked about a lot of these people here on the podcast previously. So if you're just tuning in for the first time or you've just found the podcast, jump back in the catalog and take a look, scroll through, and you'll see these people and the episodes where we discuss them and their roles within Jeffrey Epstein's organization. Here are a list of some of the men and women named in the documents obtained by the Sun. And again, remember, there's a lot of people here that we've talked about, folks that you know about, and there's some other interesting names here. Again, like Nancy Pelosi's daughter says, some of our quote-unquote faves. Has knowledge of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein's sexual trafficking conduct and interaction with underage minors. First name, Ghislaine Maxwell. Roberts has alleged that Maxwell also sexually abused her by forcing her to engage in threesomes with herself and Epstein. Next name, Jean-Luc Brunel, the French model scout and former modeling agency manager who multiple women, including Roberts, have alleged they were trafficked to by Epstein. Check. We've done podcasts on both of them. Ron Burkle, billionaire co-founder of the Ukapa Companies, LLC, a private equity and venture capital firm that specializes in purchasing and then restructuring underperforming companies. He is close friends with Sarah, Duchess of York, and Bill and Hillary Clinton. Yeah, Ron Burkle and Bill Clinton were super close. In fact, Bill Clinton used to fly around on Ron Burkle's jet as well. Isn't that nice? I'm sure that they were just, they didn't really know each other either, right? Burkle didn't know Epstein. Burkle didn't know Clinton. Clinton didn't know Burkle. None of these people know each other. You're just a conspiracy theorist if you think otherwise. Alan, I kept my underpants on Dershowitz. Polarizing lawyer and Harvard professor whose past clients include President Trump, O.J. Simpson, and Epstein, whose sweetheart deal with the state and federal prosecutors he helped broker back in 2008. Roberts has alleged that she was trafficked to Dershowitz, which he has denied. Roberts has since filed a lawsuit against him for defamation similar to the one filed against Maxwell in 2015. Dershowitz, another person that we have talked about here on the podcast at length. We have talked about him at length. There's a couple of episodes where we basically just talk about Dershowitz, and the man, in my opinion, is as guilty as the day is long. Eva and Glenn Dubin. The former girlfriend of Epstein and her doctor husband, who Roberts has alleged she was trafficked to by Epstein and Maxwell. Yeah, and her husband? Well, another person that's in the financial sector, right? How many of these sick bastards are in the financial sector, folks? Seems like a lot of them, huh? A good majority of them. Prince Andrew Albert Christian Edward, Duke of York. Wow, they did the whole name here for Prince Andrew, right? I think, the Joe Exotic of the Windsor family would have sufficed, but we'll go with his whole entire, name, I guess. The eighth in line to the British throne, who Roberts has said she was trafficked to in London at the age of 17. Prince Andrew has denied this despite Roberts having a photo of herself with Maxwell and the royal. Definitely have talked about him on the podcast. Frederick Fekkai. The famed hairstylist was the go-to guy when it came to trimming the tresses of the young women in Epstein's orbit, according to multiple reports and court filings. Fekkai has never been accused of engaging in any illegal activity. That's debatable at best, in my opinion. Have we checked the receipts? Let's look at the money angle. Remember, folks, we have to look at the money angle. The money angle is very, very important in this case. Tony Figueroa, Robert's ex-boyfriend, who says that he was asked to recruit girls for Maxwell and Epstein when he was just 17. Claire Hazel, mystery associate of Epstein whose alleged link to the pedophile remains unclear, but who flew with him on the Lolita Express, Epstein's infamous sex plane. We've heard Maria talk about Claire Hazel. Stephen Kaufman. Roberts claims that she was trafficked to Kaufman in a 2006 deposition. He has denied this accusation. Sarah Kellen, one of the Core Four. Epstein's assistant who managed to avoid charges in Florida, reportedly as part of his sweetheart deal. Many of Epstein's underage survivors have alleged that Kellen scheduled their appointments and facilitated his abuse of underage girls. Yeah, we've heard that from multiple witnesses, multiple people in the case, and here in these court documents, it's alleged again by Virginia. Now, you're telling me from what we've read so far, from the allegations put forward by Virginia, that these prosecutors couldn't have went to a grand jury and got an indictment, considering lawyers will tell you that it's so easy to get an indictment in front of a grand jury that you can indict a ham sandwich that way. Yet these people aren't indicted yet. Why haven't these people been slapped with RICO, folks? I'm getting really tired of reading about them. I'm getting really tired of knowing that they're running around like life is just so fantastic while these survivors are battling through each and every day with the burden on their shoulders placed directly there by Jeffrey Epstein and his enablers. Nadia Marcinkova, a foreign-born model who many have identified as an accomplice in procuring underage girls for Epstein. She may be just as much a victim of the serial pedophile, however, who claimed to have purchased Nadia from her family at the age of 12. I have a closer look at Nadia Marcinkova as part of my Core 4 series. If you're not familiar with her, you can go back and check that out. And with Marcinkova, she's the only one of the Core 4 who I believe deserves a chance to do the right thing, I guess you would say, by coming forward and outing the rest of them, considering she was purchased by Jeffrey Epstein from her family as a child. I think there's a lot more that goes into her case than the other Core 4. As far as punishment goes, I think we have to take a look at the whole entire picture and look at it in context. But if she doesn't come forward and she doesn't turn state's evidence and she does not show remorse for her actions by trying to further the case for the survivors, then I believe she should get the same punishment as the other Core 4 members. George Mitchell, the former senator from Maine and Senate Majority Leader from 1989 to 1995. Roberts claims she was trafficked to the senator, an allegation that he denies. We did a closer look at George Mitchell, and George Mitchell was also in charge of a fund that had to do with people getting money in Pennsylvania. I want to say abused children that were abused by priests. He had something to do with the disbursement of the money, and there was an outrage about it by some people who were aware of his involvement with Jeffrey Epstein. But for the most part, George Mitchell has been another person to fly under the radar and escape the scrutiny of the American media, when in reality, somebody like this, an ex-senator, should be getting just destroyed by the media. But again, like I said earlier in the opening monologue, we cannot rely on the legacy media to hold anybody accountable at this point, unless they can score political points one way or the other. David Rogers, Epstein's pilot, whose flight logs offered proof that Epstein and Maxwell frequently traveled with Roberts when she was underage. And you know, I always talk about evidence from Roberts, right? This is part of it. The flight logs from the pilots that put them all together in the same places at the same time. You add that with the pictures, you add that with the other corroborating stories from other witnesses, and folks, that is what you call a credible accusation. Adriana Musinska, another Epstein assistant who helped to facilitate his encounters with underage girls. Emmy Taylor, Maxwell's assistant at the time that Virginia was allegedly being trafficked by Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator. Tom Pritzker, billionaire, hotel heir, and cousin of Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker. Boy, this circle sure is small, isn't it? These people, they sure run in the same circles all the time, huh? Funny how everybody who's named in this has also denied that they knew anything about Jeffrey Epstein or his trafficking ring, right? Hey, Tom Pritzker, you have a few questions that need to be answered, sir. Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, where Epstein owned the massive Zorro Ranch. Roberts alleged in a 2016 deposition that she was trafficked to the politician. He had been seen as a possible frontrunner for the Democratic nomination in the 2008 primary, but dropped out around the same time that Epstein's legal troubles in Palm Beach came to light. Yeah, of course he did, because he knew he was about to be exposed in that case. He knew what he was up to in that case. He knew that Virginia Roberts was telling the truth. In my opinion, folks, there is no wiggle room here. There is no gray area here. These people that have been put on blast by Virginia are as guilty as the day is long. Haley Robson, the high school student who became a victim of Epstein and then became one of his biggest recruiters in Palm Beach. She too avoided charges in the Palm Beach case. Shocking, huh? All of these people avoided charges. And all of us would get the same treatment, right? Every one of us would get that same treatment, wouldn't we? Give me a break. The two-tier justice system is such a joke. It needs to be shattered into a million tiny pieces and then scattered in the winds. Larry Vysotsky, Epstein's pilot whose flight logs and deposition also provided definitive proof that Epstein knew and traveled with a number of his underage survivors. We've talked about Larry Vysotsky at length as well. We know that he lived on Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro Ranch. He had a piece of land there, a parcel of land, some acreage, and we know that his daughter also got married on that property. So again, when we're going through these lists, folks, if you've been listening to this podcast for sure, you know all of these people already. You know all of this stuff already. But this is a good refresher course. This puts it all down and right there in front of the faces of those who might not be aware of truly how sinister all of this really was and the level at which it occurred. Leslie Wexner, the billionaire owner of Victoria's Secret, not any longer, The Limited and Bath & Body Works, was Epstein's most prominent client at his money-managing firm. Again, nobody wants to take on Wexner. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that it was Wexner's ranch where Maria Farmer was held. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that it was Randy Bowie, his head of security, Wexner's head of security, who held Maria there against her will. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that Wexner is involved in this more than hip deep. Wexner needs a good hard look, and Wexner needs to be slapped with a RICO charge today. This man has very, very dirty hands, in my opinion, and he played an integral role within Jeffrey Epstein's criminal enterprise. And I believe a good quality forensic accountant would be able to provide that proof. Mr. Berman, Maureen Comey, are you listening? Igor Zionovev, the former Russian mixed martial arts fighter who became Epstein's bodyguard. And we just talked about him recently. We just did a refresher with him, talking about him and the interview that he did. And it was a pretty powerful interview, right? Though he had a lot to say. So again, you might want to, if you haven't, you're not familiar with Igor and his role in the case, check the catalog, go back to that episode, and give it a listen. Now another list of people may have knowledge of Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein's sexual trafficking conduct and interaction with underage minors. Doug Band, Bill Clinton's former aide who traveled the world with Epstein and his boss. Now you see what's going on here with all of these money men? All of these bundlers that were hanging out with Clinton all the time? Doug Band, Ron Burkle, etc., etc. That's a whole angle I haven't even really ripped apart here on this case, because it's on this podcast, because it's self-evident. Anybody who is paying attention can see that Jeffrey Epstein and Bill Clinton were thick as thieves. We all know about the Clinton Global Initiative. We know about the $6.5 million Jeffrey Epstein donation. We know about all of that, and we know how close they were. Even if the legacy media doesn't want to talk about it, even if they still protect Bill Clinton all these years later, guess what? Independent content creators and independent journalists like Whitney Webb, they're not going to be afraid. They're not going to shy away from reporting on Bill Clinton. Because guess what, folks? It does not matter who was involved in this. It doesn't matter what party you're a part of. It doesn't matter what tribe you claim. If you were involved with Jeffrey Epstein and you helped enable him, or you took part and you were part of this organization, this trafficking ring, then you're part of the problem. And your politics, or what side of the aisle you stand on, shouldn't matter to anybody. Ryan Dion, a former chef of Epstein who traveled with the pedophile. Eric Gainey, the man tasked with managing Epstein's finances. Adam Perry Lang, a former chef of Epstein who traveled with the pedophile. Now, Adam Perry Lang is an interesting one. I've been working on some stuff with Adam Perry Lang, doing some investigating into Adam Perry Lang, and we're probably going to do a closer look at him at some point in the future. Peter Listerman, an associate of Epstein who was once described as the world's famous seller of young models to oligarchs, by Kristina Goncharova, a one-time Miss Teen Ukraine who alleges she was one of Listerman's victims. That doesn't shock me. Jeffrey Epstein hanging out with somebody who is called the world-famous seller of young models to oligarchs? And we know that all of the so-called elites in America believe themselves to be oligarchs. So would it be shocked that they were taking part of this the same way as maybe a Russian oligarch would, or a Ukrainian oligarch would? Doesn't shock me. Birds of a feather and all, right? Todd Meester, best known for his brief marriage to socialite Nikki Hilton, Meester's hedge fund was given a huge boost with an investment from Wexner. The filing also included a number of women who the Sun is not naming out of an abundance of caution. Roberts named these individuals in a filing of potential witnesses she would like to depose in the case. How many, if any, actually sat down for depositions before Maxwell settled out of court is not clear. It has now been 10 months since Epstein's New York City mansion was raided by the FBI and NYPD, but there have been no additional arrests. And why not? What are you waiting for, Berman? Everybody's standing around waiting for you to make your move. You have all of the power of the SDNY at your fingertips. It's too bad you're not Chuck Rhodes from Billions, because if that was the case, this would have been a wrap already. But unfortunately, we're stuck with Berman, who seems to be hanging out in neutral as opposed to putting the pedal to the metal and really bringing the lumber down on these people. Break out the bazooka and fire the Rico shot. A number of these individuals have also not been questioned by authorities, including Prince Andrew. Maxwell, meanwhile, emerged from hiding back in March to sue Epstein's estate for failing to cover her legal bills. What sort of bizarro world are we living in where Ghislaine effing Maxwell pops up out of whatever hidey hole she's currently in to sue the estate to try and have them defend her and make them cover her legal bills? On what planet does that sound like a good strategy? On what planet should that ever occur? Certainly not this one. Certainly not in this reality. Ghislaine Maxwell must be arrested. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. There is no more time to waste. Ghislaine Maxwell must be brought in. And every one of these people on this list, folks, every single one of these people on this list under a RICO case can be considered a co-conspirator. And then once that happens, you bring them all in and you have them turn on each other. Prosecution work 101, Mr. Berman. Where are you at? There was a time when the SDNY was the most feared office in the nation. There was a time when the agents from that office faced down the mafia and dismantled them piece by piece. And now they're running away and avoiding going after the core four and Ghislaine Maxwell. They don't have the fortitude to go after Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators with all of this evidence available to them, and a lot more, folks, than we have. Believe that. There is a lot more evidence in this case than what we have at our fingertips. And I don't mean like speculation. I don't mean like the what ifs. I'm talking about actual hard evidence. Where's all the stuff that they took from the raids? Where's all of that evidence? That's a treasure trove of evidence. You mean to tell me there's no links financially or otherwise, between all of these people and Jeffrey Epstein? I'm sorry, but I do not believe that. And I said it from the beginning of the year, folks. This year right now, 2020, this is the year where the predator is turning into the prey. And we're seeing that happen right before our eyes. Day by day, week by week, month by month, things are getting rougher for them. No more easy nights of sleep for them. No more thinking that this is in the past, because guess what? It's not. The new reality for all of these people is this. The new reality is questions are going to be asked, and we demand that those questions are answered. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, folks, I will be back tomorrow with the morning update. I hope everybody has a fantastic night.